Hi, this is Adam Eliyahu Berkowitz coming at you live from the Golan for Israel 365 News. I have a very special guest. He's actually an old friend of mine who I am absolutely in awe of. The man is very much into serving Hashem through the land of Israel. This is my friend Rabbi Shaul Judelman. He's originally from Seattle, and he's a student of Rabbi Menachem Froman. He learned with me at Bada Yeshiva, which is in Gush Etzion. And he's a very strong believer in the land of Israel as an expression of serving Hashem, and of the land in general, ecology, ecological issues. And I think that's an issue that's very important. And my personal opinion, I'd like to discuss this with Rabbi Shaul, is there's a problem, I think, in the religious community that there's a reaction because we're having an agenda, political agenda. Everything got politicized and it's being pushed at us in political expressions like the Green New Deal and stuff like that. All of a sudden, the concept of love of the earth and love of planet and love God's creation is being usurped and taken away from us. So I'd like to speak to Rabbi Shaul about the whole concept of how an Eved Hashem, how a servant of Hashem should view ecology.
Right. Great question. I think it's the politicization of everything is why a lot of things lose out. And one of the teachings I really loved about in Judaism was about Jacob. We always say that Avraham was the person of chesed, of kindness, of love. He was always sharing and caring with everybody. Isaac was an aspect of judgment, and he's very held together, didn't get too excited about things. And Jacob, we say, was this fusion of the two of them. And one of the fusions I like, though, the fusion doesn't mean he was a little bit of this and a little bit of that. And a teaching from Zusha's, one of Zuba's favorite book, the Sod Yesharim, a very famous Hasidic sefer from 200 years ago. Not as famous as some of the big ones. But he says what it means to be Tiferet is what it means to be present with what's called for. Not to come with the agenda, I'm a kind person, so I'm always kind, or I'm a guarded person, so I'm always guarded. To be present with what needs to be, and let this relationship with what God showed me in this moment is how I'm supposed to react, and let that be with my biggest determinant. As opposed to I'm a right winger, I'm a left winger, and then because of that, not to fall into that place, and that way we can look at every single instance on its own. Which I think is a very Jewish way. In the Talmud. The Talmud doesn't give these big proclamations of you shall always do this. No, it looks at each situation, and the rabbis dealt with it, and different rabbis have different opinions about it, and they really dealt with it in the story itself, as opposed to having these ideologies that I think we fall into, that sometimes in our generation we fall, because I'm check on this, that means I'm also XYZ, and it means that's a whole package deal. And I think we have to be open that, also I'm a big student of Rav Kook, Rav Isaac Kook, who talked about the spark of light that's present in everything going on in the world. Almost everything in the world in its core has some divine spark animating it. Now, there's a lot of stuff that clings on the outside. But he says one of our jobs in redemption time is to collect all those sparks. That means that in just like in, say the capitalism, socialism discourse, debate, there's a big spark of truth in capitalism. It says you're an individual and you can unleash that power, and so much can be done by doing that. Socialism says, what do you mean? We're all part of a collective. There's a big truth. We are all part of a collective. So to say that I'm either this or this means that if that blinds me to the spark of truth that's on the other side, then I'm missing something deep that's also part of the oneness. And I think ecology is the same way. I'll tell you about how politicized it can get. There's a story a friend of mine told me a few years ago. There's a Jewish community called Chomesh in the northern part of Samaria. And it was destroyed by the government as part of kind of the peace talks and things like that. Afterwards, a group of young Jews went back up to the hilltop and we started yeshiva there, and they started learning there, trying to rebuild. And friends of mine have a business doing composting toilets. Okay, meaning especially if you're in a place on a hilltop with no running water, to be able to have a toilet that works on a compost system. So basically, through a very well thought out system, that human waste can, after a year of high temperature, this compost can turn into good soil. And they had a business. They went out and set them up for places, and they offered to come and set them up on the hilltop because there's no running water there. And what are they doing with the sewage? You stay there for a week. And when they got there, they said the people chased them off the hill because they assumed if they're coming there with something about composting toilets, that's environmentalism. That's left-wing stuff. You guys must be against us. And it took them a long time to convince them that no, we're here because we love the land. and taking care of the land is also can be part of the land. But it's, for me, that was a sharp example of how politicized these things can be, and how we can blind ourselves to things that are actually have aspects of truth. That's one thing I think is important to put out there. Like the ecology definitely gets is definitely seen as a left-wing thing, right? It's a whole part of a whole set. But caring for the land, are you telling me that caring for the land, that as a religious Jew, I believe a creator created this land, and people were talking about caring for that, that I have to kind of distance myself all back? There's a lot of truth in there. There's a lot to learn from there. There's a lot of things I think we should be applying also in better ways here, specifically here in Israel, but I think anywhere. We have a lot to learn how we can better live on this land and better receive the blessing that God gave us in this creation.
Joel, I have a question for you, a little bit of a wild question for you.
Yeah.
According to the Talmud, the world as we know it is supposed to last 6,000 years. We're currently in the year 5,781, which leaves us with a mere 219, a little over 2 centuries left for the world as we know it to exist. If that is the case, why do we have to be so careful about the environment if the world is only going to exist for another 2 centuries?
I don't know what that means. Like, I'm honest, what does it mean? The 6,000 years of creation, it's not so clear what those 6,000 years mean. Just like I'm not sure that the world was literally created 6,000 calendar Gregorian years ago. I don't know what does it mean? So, and I think a lot of times when we get into the world of messianic understandings, it's really easy to assume we know what it's talking about. And my main thing is, I don't know what that means. Does that mean I can go today and don't think about what I do? Don't have to think about the effects of what I do, because in 200 years everything's going to be gone. There also place in the Talmud where it famously says, if a person is planting a tree and somebody comes to them and says, Messiah is here, Messiah has arrived, the Talmud says, keep planting your tree. Meaning there's processes in the world, and we can't let the messianic hope that it's all going to be over right tomorrow stop us from doing the work that actually. And I think that planting the tree in the Jewish tradition is a very deep statement. It's like the story of Choni, about Choni, who saw an older, a man in his 70s planting a tree, and he says, "Why are you planting a tree? You're never going to eat from it." And he says, "I came to a world where there are trees planted, and I enjoy from them, and I'm planting here for the next generation and the next generation." And I think there's a very deep ethic in that about how Judaism walks. And I think there's a very fine line in the pragmatism of Judaism, and then the kind of the messianism or the dreaming of Judaism. And I think especially in the land of Israel, we're forced to walk them both. And I think it's in a lot of things in Israeli society today. We have there's a tremendous messianic era we're living in, and it's clear the fact that I'm speaking to you from Tekoa, outside of the homeland of Amos, is an incredibly powerful thing. But it's also I think it's easy to get carried away with that spark and not think about the simple tikkun things of what it means of everything from family to society to building those processes that we're in. So that
brings me to a more practical question. So most people are not farmers today as they once were. Right. Most people today are living in big cities. They're in urban centers. And they don't think about the agriculture. They don't think like we thousands of years ago, even hundreds of years ago, people were dependent on rain. And today, even though we have it in our prayers to pray for rain, and clearly many of the commandments that specifically apply to the land of Israel are agricultural commandments, we have sort of moved away from that and lost what the meaning of that is. How do we get that back?
And I saw once an interesting debate between two rabbis conversing of, since most of the prophecies also, of course, were also written 2,000 years ago, 2,000 plus years ago, in a very their language is very agricultural. They will come back to the land to be planted, and you will dwell under your fig tree. There's a question about in the Messianic times, are we going to go back to being an agricultural society? I mean, are we Luddites? We're just going to throw all this back, or are we going to? How's that going to work? And you're right. I think less than 0.5% of Jewish Israelis today make a living from working the land. Less than 0.5%. So I think it's a very important question, is what, so much of Judaism, the text we received, was written in a totally different society. So when I got to Israel, I was 21, I came to kibbutz, to Steliao, and I got here 2 months before the sabbatical year, 2 months before Shmita began. It's on a religious kibbutz. It's an agricultural kibbutz, where still 70-80% of their incomes from agriculture. It's a huge question what to do with Shmita. And some interesting things happened for me that really opened my eyes to Judaism, what Israel means then. But you're right, and Shmita is probably the biggest challenge it's the biggest challenge agriculturally, but it's also one of the most collective commandments. Really, to live sabbatical year and really have it what it actually means, that this agricultural law of not harvesting and allowing your harvest rather to be free for anybody who doesn't have. There's a huge vision there of resetting the socioeconomic, the haves and the have-nots, that whoever does not have is welcome to come harvest, of forgiving debts at the end of the 7th year. There's a huge vision, but it's based on it being an agricultural society. What do we do with it today? And I think a lot of those parts of Judaism, it's very easy to forget and say, oh, that was then. We don't have to worry about those things now. The last time Shmita came around, I was part of a very amazing initiative here in Israel called Shmita Yisraelit, an Israeli Shmita. And we took those ideas of Shmita and we went to government offices, to heads of companies in Israel. And
is that Rabbi Tzvi Ramon?
More, it was with Einat Kramer. So Tzvi Ramon was also involved with it. But we took it, let's take the vision of Shmita for an Israeli society. Not the halachic principle that you won't eat that piece of fruit, but the idea of Shmita and how we're going to make it real. And because we realized less than 0.5% of Jews today make a living from Shmita, from agriculture, Shmita could be very irrelevant to everybody. It's an argument about what vegetables to eat. But we said, no, what do I work today? What's my field that every one of us works in order to make a living? It's my time. It's my time. I work 7 hours, 8 hours a day. I get paid on the clock. And if I were to take Shmita in a way that would affect society today, I would give up some of my time. I would give up an hour a day, 8 hours a day. And we had all kinds of programs that were initiated to happen in the last Shmita. We had time banks in towns like the town where I live in Batayim. We started a time bank and people were giving their time to each other. We had museums and national parks who were opening up their gates for free to people to come in. And we had companies that were going to give their employees 1 month a day on the books, but in the Shmita, a day of community service, bring their families to the office, do things around the neighborhood, and taking the idea of Shmita and trying to get over this gap you're pointing out, right? There's a big gap between the agricultural mitzvot, commandments, and where our society is at. I think we have a big work to do to not lose them in that way. And even if it's not the same Torah mandated description of what the sabbatical year was 2,000 years ago, but it also takes our Judaism and the Torah and makes it in a way that for me shines a big light into modern Israeli society. We had people that were completely secular Jews saying, wait a second, this is Judaism? This is what the Torah is talking about? And I want to be a part of that, because you're right. We had a program with the government, 30,000 families in debt. We're going to get debt relief as part of Shmita. Through on condition that they go into financial planning programs with nonprofits here. It was a really amazing idea of taking these agricultural, because agriculture touches everything. It touches the land, the economy, the people, the societal things. Indonesia. So that for me, something was really exciting about, also that using these parts of Torah to also do some bridge building within Israeli society, kind of crossing the religious secular divide, which can be it's a very real divide in our society.
And now that the majority of the Jews are in Israel, or soon to be in Israel, that even takes it more of a impact. And the Yovel is even more of a radical idea.
Of Jubilee, right.
You're actually we're all dancing around something that's so important, which is that for 2,000 years, the Jewish people, we were in many cases forbidden from connecting to the land in a meaningful way when we were in the exile. And so if you want to see, is now connecting the land is very much an affirmation that we're home, that this is our land, that we belong here. So it's a huge blessing. And a sign of, the deserts are blooming. And I always felt like there was a relationship between us and the land and us. It was reciprocal, that the land knows that we're back, that the land senses we're here and is responding to us. I think I've actually seen that.
There's that very anthropomorphic, it's a land that devours its inhabitants. This land is a living land, which is, which does touch on a very deep kind of, in one part of kind of the more spiritual part of the ecology world, which really does relate to the world as a living entity, as a created entity. I think if we come at things from a purely scientific thing, I don't know what the science says about the land, but in Judaism, the word for the land is the creation. bria. It's like the land was a created, just like we were created bodies. This land was a creation, and it's part of that relationship to Creator. And for me, I'd say, I think Eliyahu, you once me asked, Shaul, what's environmentalism on one foot as a Jew to you? Is if I believe that there's a Creator, then I relate to this world as a gift from the Creator. It's what the Creator gave us to sustain us. It's what holds us. And forget any other environmental story. That's enough. You were given a gift. I think that's a very powerful part of a person who believes in God, that's supposed to kind of shape or impact the way we relate to this natural world. It's not just a given. It's not just a chance thing that there happens to be these wonderful fossil fuels, or that it happens to be a planet with this amount of radiation or chemicals or ozone. It's a very precise gift that we were gifted to be a part of here. And I think that itself already speaks what is a responsibility.
Yeah, it sounds like rather than as we say in Hebrew, throw the table over and walk away from the dialogue. I think, if anything, people of faith, people who are deeply connected to the Bible, who are deeply connected to the concept of creation, to the concept of the final redemption, we have a very powerful message, a powerful aspect, an approach to what they call ecology. I feel kind of strange calling it ecology. We have a powerful addition that must be put into the equation when people are concerned with what happens to the planet.
Absolutely. I think it's obvious. It's been a forgotten muscle, along with the rest of things that happen in exile. Not working the land, not owning land. All the questions of society. How Judaism. What's a Jewish economy? What's is Judaism capitalist or socialist? Those are core questions that I think we have a lot to learn from. And at the last in Brazil, there was a big climate conference about 3 years ago. And about 6 years ago, it was really a great merit to learn with a really special rabbi, Rabbi Dov Berkovitz, who lives in Shiloh, and another Berkovitz. And we had a Beit Midrash that really took some deep questions about environmental issues. We were studying them through the Gemara, through the Talmud, and other sources. We were also asking rabbis across the board in Israel and other people, kind of leading thinking people. And it was really interesting. We asked a lot of rabbis very, very pointed questions. Can I use my charity money to for instance, I don't know, to save water? Water is a big issue in Israel, and conserving water is a big issue. Is it a worthwhile use of Meiser money to invest in things that will reduce how much water I waste? And I really respected the answers we got from a lot of rabbis, which said, honestly, I don't know. I don't know enough about this issue to really give you an answer, but right on, kol hakavod for exploring this question. It needs a lot more thought, and it needs a lot more understanding for how we better live in this land. And as a part of that process, we actually sent a statement to this big climate conference, and say, because we as the Jewish people are also thinking about these questions. And there's some very deep philosophical questions, practical questions that balancing economy and environmental things, that I think our tradition has a lot of experience in weighing those kinds of issues. And we sent a statement there about how a Jewish perspective on some of these things. And there's other people doing interesting work in this field. And I think it's definitely a sign of redemption to actually think about what it means to build a society. That's why Josh, when you asked the question about, but in 200 years, what if this is part of the reawakening of being back in the land? It's an important question. If my meat spoon falls into a milk soup, is it kosher or not? That's an important question. A much also important question is, what's a Jewish take on a just economy? What's about how we settle the land? There's very clear guidelines in the Gemara about how we should be settling. And there's big questions about preserving green space, open space, balancing human needs and natural needs. There's all kinds of questions about resources, about whose responsibility is to take care of a water source, who gets from that water, what uses are appropriate, which are not appropriate. And there's and a lot of those laws in our tradition have really lied dormant. And in a lot of ways, we're not settling the land even in accordance with what our tradition is supposed to be telling us.
My dear friend Yishai Fleischer is fond of saying that when he is called up for his reserve duty in the IDF, so he always insists that they give him the small little shovel that you have to ask for today, because it's not usually given to people anymore. But he says that, that's the mitzvah when you're talking about a military encampment, is to have a shovel. So when you have to take care of your waste, you have to have a shovel in order to cover it up. So that's something that he feels
You've
very strongly
just
about.
answered my question. I had a religious officer who every time we started our month-long service, he would make it a point to go out to the field and do his duty. And we're laughing, but there are so many. I mean, I'm wondering if there's another word besides ecology, because when we're talking about all of this, I mean, it's so you can't read the Torah without running across concepts of that are steeply connected to the land. It's just everything is the land.
Yishuv haaretz. I think in one land, it's how we live and settle the land. That's even the word. I mean, the word ecology is far. I'm not a big Greek speaker, but eco logos. It's the wisdom of the home. Eco is the home, and logos I think is chokhmah. It's the wisdom of how you build a home. And so Yeshuva, I hope Eliyahu's. I think Yeshuva is the settling of the land. How do we settle? How do we build our sewage systems? How do we build where do we get our water from? All those questions where we touch the land is a big question, and I think there's so much room for improvement and better living in the land. Eliyahu got stuck, but I think he was asking me about. I'm going to lead my own question.
Oh,
Josh,
Josh is.
I'm here.
Okay, so one of the questions I think about has to do with redemption and facing up to these questions is like this. We lived in diaspora, in exile, in ghettos, and separate. And one of the big questions that happens when we come back to the land is a reawakening of the Jewish connection with the nations around us, to be again a part of the peoples of the world. And in that question, that's also a similar thing that the environmental crisis, that things going on. Pollution doesn't stop on a national boundary. It doesn't stop here. It's really a question. I think it speaks to kind of I think why is the environmental crisis part of redemption? Because it's asking us to think as a world, to understand what's going on over there, also to engage with those things, to build up a deeper understanding about what we're all doing here. And I think it started happening now. This environmental crisis, that we talked about the last 40, 50 years. It has a lot to do with where we are in human society. We came as a Jewish people back into our land and can deal with these questions just like everybody else, sharing the wisdom. Israel exporting some of the incredible technology that they developed here for water technology, from solar technology. It's a place where we build bridges as a world to think of ourselves as one creation again. And Shiur Hashem Kol Haaretz, like sing. Well, the Psalms say that when the world will sing to God, it's praise, God's praise. There's a very redemptive part of that verse. We sing it on the Friday night Kabbalah Shabbat. And I think being part of that as a Jewish people, again, back in our land, facing these questions, not just as individuals, but as a state, and having to think on a malchut, on a national level again. I'll find that it's, I'll remember the name of the company in a second. Finding a way to deal with these questions is part of our reconnecting with the world around us, with the international, with all the nations.
I can tell you from experiences that I have in the military, and it's something that's not often discussed publicly, but there is a question as to what to do if there is I shouldn't say if there is, because it's when there is going to be a major earthquake, because it's just a matter of when this will happen. We don't know exactly when, but it will happen. Historically, earthquakes happen, and on the Syrian-African rift that goes through the fault that runs through the line of our country, it also splits through a number of other neighboring countries, some of which we don't have. Not only don't we have diplomatic relations, but they're considered enemy states. And it's got that if there is a major earthquake, it'll affect everybody, and it'll be a disaster for all these states. And how we're going to interact with these states that we have no connection to is something that is definitely discussed, even though, again, publicly it's usually avoided.
Right, like the firefighting. Remember in the Carmel fire, the aid and shipping aid. There's been with Jordan, with the peace treaties of Jordan, and say for all the good and the bad, for all the peace that there is there. But there's a huge project with fruit flies that was Israel had a very amazing technology to get rid of this pest that was destroying a lot of the crops. But they realized if we treat it in Israel, but in Jordan it's everywhere, it's not going to help anything. So it's those kinds of places are sources of kind of regional cooperation. I think it's also a part for as part of redemption, as part of Israel again, seeing ourselves as part of our region again. And slowly those kinds of connections building and gaining, I think it's part of also a redemptive process there. There's a
Now I'm hearing some feedback from one of you. I'm not sure where it's coming from, but should check your microphones and your. This is definitely fascinating stuff, because I think that, like you said, that most people, most Jews, even Orthodox Jews, that follow all or try to follow all the commandments, they're not familiar with this large aspect of Judaism, which has pretty much been lost in exile. It's something that's been lost, and there's so many things that we have to bring back to the Jewish people during this redemptive process. And there's even an argument to be made. Some historians make the argument that the anti-Zionist rabbis who refused to endorse the Zionist movement did so because of fear of the questions, the questions that were in Jewish law that would come up, that they would have no idea how to solve. Of course, for thousands of years in exile, all we had to exist on were the books of Jewish law, the Shulchan Aruch, and it didn't explain to us how we should create a society, how we should have an economy, what we should do with the environment, and all these questions that would come up, and they didn't know how to deal with it. So they said it's better that we shouldn't get into these sort of issues.
Right. No, I remember Aliyah. I remember Rav Natan Greenberg in Batayin in the Rosh Yeshiva. He once gave a powerful talk, but the short of it was, the whole point of redemption is that as a Jew, we no longer fear what's coming on the road to approach us. In exile, we always lived in fear, and we always circled the wagons and hid inside. He says part of the process of coming to a space of redemption is that what's coming up on the road, I don't have to be afraid of it. I can engage it. I can engage in it. I can clarify what's real, what's not real. And I hear the halachic fear of having to deal with these questions. There it is. It's what is the right thing. Some of them are a lot of very complex issues, and to really come to this is what it is. This is the exact answer. Maybe we can't do that, but I think that's also a part of the Torah of Eretz Yisrael, is that I'm not living in that fear. I can also, I might make a mistake, God forbid, but then I might be able to stand up and arise again and learn better.
A lot of our listeners actually consider themselves to be very conservative. I'm curious to know what you would say to a conservative who would say, should a conservative be involved in the environment? Is that something that's one of the issues that a conservative should even deal with? Well, which is funny. I have to say that the word conservative or conservatism, obviously, right, you would think that would be very environmental, not
conservationist. No, there's a lot of those nafochus that happen in our, and that really speaks like the shortcoming of how just how tragic the whole kind of politicization of everything, right, the classic right-left breakdowns are, that things like caring for for God's gift, that's like a left-wing value. And that's what struck me here when I moved to Gush Etzion, is like, how can the religious Zionist world, the people who care about this land, all we see is conquering the land. We don't see what it actually means to actually build on it. And I think there has been a real awakening in Yudav Shimon, the next generation, this next generation about thinking about those questions more and putting them more on the table, not being afraid that this is a left-wing thing. And there's some special organizations now. There's Igud Arim that does a lot of work on very important stuff in Yudav Shimon, sewage issues, and all kinds of things that is being picked up. So as a conservative around the world, I think don't let the politics take you from serving God. and it's, every person has their own process. They'll figure out their way to address these issues, to think about what's the right way to bring them up. And it's true, sometimes the values that they come attached with are very, very opposed to other values that I have that are dear to me, that are part of my worldview. But that doesn't mean that it's the same thing. Like, why should we let the left wing make peace? We don't care about peace. We also have a way of approaching peace.
Absolutely.
And I think that's been a lack. Peace is a left wing thing. This is peace is a value of God, and we have a different way. And I'm not going for the humanist. I don't think we have to all leave our identities and leave our connections to our lands to make peace. No, I have to be strong and connect to my identity. From there, I'm going to make peace. But that's another example of how we I saw yesterday people were posting, Biden attacked Syria, and people are joking like, wow, how could a left winger attack? Well, he's thank God a person knows when a red line isn't to act upon a red line. I don't know the whole story, whatever's going on there, but to end up be thinking that war is only the right and peace is only the left, or ecology is there and big business and fossil fuels are the right. I think we're blinding ourselves to some things we should that both sides should be learning from.
So maybe the breaking down of those borders, of those barriers that you spoke about earlier, and you obviously were speaking about those borders with other nations, either with amongst us or on the other side of our borders. Maybe those could also be within our borders, that there are borders that have to be broken down, whether it be through the right wing or the left wing. I know that I personally get very offended when I see someone littering in the street. That has nothing to do with my politics. I just think that that's being disrespectful to the land that we're obligated to respect.
Yeah. No, I think it's important to claim that. I think it's important to claim that. To be able to find the way to speak for that in my value set. That what is it in my Jewish value, my right wing values, my conservative values that touches, and that's wrong. I don't have to use the same value set that an environmentalist, like a classic environmentalist, a classic liberal approach would say. I have to think of my own values and what's important to me. That's my take. About 10 years ago, I also got to be part of a very cool project. There was a woman who was living in Israel, and she's kind of becoming connected to Judaism again. She took a bike ride through a religious neighborhood, and somebody happened to throw a bag of garbage out of the second floor window, and it almost knocked her on her bike. And she said, "I can't believe this. These are religious people living in the city of Jerusalem, throwing garbage just like that. What's going on here?" So they were messing with the wrong woman, and she helped support a project where we ended up going into synagogues in Jerusalem between the afternoon and the evening prayers, and giving a 15-minute class on a Torah version, a very Torah-based explanation of what it is, the beauty of Jerusalem, the beauty of the land, what our obligation is to protect it, to keep it, to conserve it, whatever the word is.
Sounds like they picked the right woman.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and I had a Litvish version. I had like a Hasidish version. Like for different synagogues to speak. Is it a purely halachic argument, or am I going to also talk a little bit more of but to find the values in the community that what it was about? And I think that was a very important making those questions. We had little magnets. Shmita al Kedushat Yerushalayim. Our house is keeping Kedushat Yerushalayim, and it means, from the tachanot of Joshua when he came into the land about what's allowed in the city, about not having the furnaces burning inside the old city. There's plenty of material in the book. It's just a matter of, I think, of seeing it and reading it again and applying it.
Eliyahu, are you able to speak? Because you've been coming in and out. You're on mute.
Okay.
There we go.
There we go. I'm just fascinated by this because I'm an old school hippie, so this is very much something I came from, and I don't want to abandon it. I think, if anything, living in the land of Israel and being a Torah observant Jew is just adding more to that. And also, you mentioned that you kind of think we're in a special time, the end of days. We're coming up to we only have a maximum a couple hundred years left. I'd like to think that Hashem, when he created the world, he told man to take care of it. And when it comes time for us to finish up with Mashiach, with the redemption, he's going to check out how we did, how we took care of it.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, that's an ominous spot. I mean, right now we have like a giant tar spill. It's all across Israel's beaches right now. God gave us this world, these incredible resources, and I was joking about it with a friend. It's kind of like your parents leave you the house for a week, and they tell you they're coming back next Tuesday. So come Wednesday night, and you've had your fun with your friends, and in a couple of hours your parents are going to walk in the door. And can I really look them in the eye and keep their trust that I took care of their home? And I feel that's kind of humanity. We've done our, we're living our lives here, we're doing things, but do I really feel like what's going on in my society today that I feel that I can look God in the eye? And here I want to say, for me also, the question, the environmentalist, not just the environmentalist, it's also what our society is like. What's going on in our society? Can I look at the Creator? Can we look at the Creator in the eye and say, this is the world we've been busy keeping for you and keeping going and working on? And I think, that I think for me, it's every which way I look, there's a million ways I need to do better. There's a million ways to do better. And I don't want to be afraid of any of those things because they're not my, they're not my politics.
So we have a lot of a lot of viewers from outside of Israel and viewers who are not necessarily Jewish. Would you say it's a religious imperative for them as well to guard the world, to protect the creation?
Yeah, for me, it's I think you can approach that question from many different places. You can go from a totally utilitarian perspective of, there's resources, we have to make sure there's enough, or we don't have to make there's enough. For me, it really stems if I believe that there's a creator, and the creator gave humans a very powerful role in this creation, as real partners in this creation in many ways. That for me, that's the story. That's the responsibility begins. That before getting any specific commandments in the Jewish Bible, or before finding any of the actual sources, it's just this world is a creation. There's a creator, and I have a relationship and responsibility to that creator. I don't like the word right. I don't feel I have a right to this world. I don't think Judaism believes in rights. I think Judaism believes in responsibilities. That's what we have as a believing person. That we all have a responsibility to this gift we were given. Responsibility to our kids. I don't have a right to my kids. I have a responsibility to them. And if somebody has a responsibility towards me, my parents had a responsibility to take care of me. It wasn't my right that I get food. It was, and I think that perspective for me is also, I think comes from being a believing person in a sense of what it means that I'm acknowledging a creator, and that a creator that's hands-on in this world. So yeah, I think it applies definitely our people. I think our people as a Jewish people with this land have a very special connection, and a very special responsibility then. But I think that must go true for every person wherever they are. And that again, I think there is kind of a redemptive consciousness there. I think that moment when we saw the picture of the Earth from the space, from which spacecraft it was, it's a powerful thing to see the creation, like the planet on which we live here, and to recognize, wow, it really is. God is infinite. The world is not infinite, and I'm not infinite. It's the same way I think about myself when I think about I have these. Each of us, please God, 120 years in this world. That makes me conservative. That makes me a little more conservative in how I, to take care of myself, to take care of the world I have, to think about all the question of also, when my life's over, what I'm leaving for my kids and for the others. I think that kind of humility is probably at the core of what it's about, a kind of a humble perspective towards the world and to the creator, and then also to thinking about the impact of my actions too.
Yeah, I think that is a great example in the parents' house. I think that's a very Bible-oriented perspective, which is where you're connected to creation, you're connected to life, to the continuing of life. It's why we're so connected to family. I want the earth to continue for my God, for my children and my grandchildren. There's a belief that this will all go on. So I think that's all very much, which is why I think that we have to get the Bible, and we have to get spirituality and religion back into the discussion of ecology, back into the narrative.
The other word I'd put in that, what has to be brought into it, is economy. Economy. A lot. It was always the environmentalist versus the economist, and I think that's a big mistake we fell into. These either ors. There's tremendous amounts of jobs and money to be made in the environmental world. To me, in kind of new technologies and figuring things out, and I think that's also an important. And I also think in Judaism, the way I treat somebody else, if it's an employer, if it's an employee, the way I relate to how economics happen in my society, directly tied to the environmental resource and whether the rains fall. Our tradition is very clear.
The sabbatical is also ecological, agricultural, and also economic. You're absolutely correct on that. Absolutely correct. Josh, you wanted to say something? Oop, Josh is gone.
No, I was just saying that's an excellent point, that the economy clearly it works both ways. It could be used, it could be promoted, or it could be degraded depending on how you look at it. But Israel in particular has been a leader in the industry of synthesizing those two things, and the fact that we lead in solar and we lead in wind and all these different industries that are coming out. Just like it says, we're also able to enlighten the world and be a light unto the world when it comes to protecting the land and providing for it.
It's amazing. We were talking to the head of the JNF not so long ago, and Israel is one of the very few countries that entered the 22nd century with more trees than we had when we entered the 21st century. The return to the land for us was very much meant trees, very much meant planting, and it started even before the state of Israel. So I think this is a powerful message that has to be emphasized even more. And I think we did lose an awful lot of it in the exile, which disconnected us from our land and disconnected us from land in general, and I think also warped our sense of economy. So there's a return there that needs to happen. So God willing. Everyone's talking about the Jubilee. Wow.
The Jubilee is a deeply messianic, even how we understand it today. The sabbatical year we engage, we're obligated. It's, like Josh mentioned, when more than 50% of the Jewish people will be living in the land of Israel, we'll be more obligated, actually. But Jubilee, you can't really do Jubilee until you know which tribe you're from and where your family's holding is in this land, which is, alavai. We hope tomorrow to know, as a renter, I'm very excited to know where my actual piece of land is. But until I do that,
there's a house down the street from me, which I'd love to see you into.
I feel a certain connection here to Harei the Judean part, but who knows? But I mean so in terms of the actual practical getting to Jubilee, and Jubilee is a tremendous take on kind of designing what that Jewish economy is. The whole question of land ownership, what it's, and how it functions in modern society, modern economies, and how it functions in Israel is actually very interesting, about how with so much of the land here being held by kind of national trusts as opposed to private owners. But Jubilee really is a redemption, that people actually go back to the piece of land that their family's land is. And imagine what that means. I think I read once the average American family moves 19 times in their life, if not more, lives in 19 different homes. So how connected do you get to the piece of land you're in when the chances that your parents or your kids, your grandkids are going to be living in the same place is almost zilch. But when you live in the land of Israel that's yay small, and you're living on this piece of land, which is going to be your kids' land and your grandkids' land, the question of how you dispose of your waste is going to feel a little bit differently then. And I think that's something also that the land here is a really reflection back to us as a people of our decisions, and it kind of forces some questions to us to deal with it. In another place we could say, you move on, America, you move west, just go west, just keep going. Well, you can't do that. We can't do that. I think there's something powerful about God designed that for us. That there's a coming to terms with that, what it means to live in this, in a space like that, and have to keep that relationship to a space, and you can't just move on. It was important for God to bring the Jewish people back to the land, so we face those questions, and then everything else that comes along with that inside of ourselves.
So every 50 years the Jubilee happens, and during that time, just for those that are not familiar, the land within Israel goes back to the original tribes, the original owners. But that having been said, what is above the land does not transfer ownership. So, for example, if someone had a nice beachside hotels in Tel Aviv, and the tribe of Dan decides to come back and take over that land, they'll get the land, but they'll have to pay back for the hotels that are built on top of it, which makes it a very complicated legal matter as to how all this transfer will happen.
This concept of redeeming the land is very much connected with the redemption, final redemption, Messiah, which is why we read about it a lot in the book of Ruth. There's a lot of concern given to her family plot of land, because the land isn't mine and I can't sell it. It's really a heritage that's given around, that's given down. Shaul,
somebody asked the name of the
I'm
compost.
sorry.
How do I want to? Somebody asked the name of the composting. If I want to, Benichuta. I don't know how to share the chat so everybody can see it, but so I want to give a plug for my friends Benichuta.
I tried looking for it, but it turns out that there are a lot of composting toilet companies in Israel, which now that I think about it, it doesn't surprise me. So Shaul, I'd really like to thank you an awful lot. This has been as redemptive as I thought it would be. And I'd like to thank our viewers. I think we're gonna wrap it up about here. Yeah, thanks for joining us. This has been Shaul Judelman, Rabbi Shaul Judelman, who blends Torah and the ecology and economy and brings it all together in the most beautiful, practical way. Josh was we have the link to the composting toilet company. So it was me in the Golan, Shaul, Rabbi Shaul in Tekoa, which is in Gush Etzion. And Josh is always with us from the Mount of Olives. I'd like to thank you for joining us. And if you bless us, we have to bless you back, because that's the way it's written. That's the instructions on the back of the box. That's the way it works. Thank you all for joining us, and be blessed and have an amazing day.